Hello and welcome to SmartPM. This is the PMP application process demystified. This has been revised earlier this year to reflect the changes in the Project Management Institute application process. The topics today is we'll discuss, first of all, introduce myself, speak a bit about PMI and what some of the reasons would be that one would want to get certified in the first place. We'll look at the certifications that are available, and namely the PMP or CapM. And we'll look at the steps involved in getting certified. We'll look at what the PMI exam is all about, some frequently asked questions from people just like yourselves, and an opportunity to submit any questions that you might have. This is me. I am the SmartPM team lead, and I help students just like yourself in terms of the exam preparation. My website is SmartPM, and I have been conducting training since 2006. I've been teaching adults since the year 2000, and I'm mainly involved in conducting PM training and project management development in Ottawa, Toronto, Kitchener, and Waterloo. And remotely, I have students from around the world that participate in my online training program. And I've been specifically involved with the development of curriculum for the PMP and CapM preparation since 2007. You can also find me on my Twitter account at T10 Associate. Let's look now at the certification itself. And as of this past year, there's approaching 750,000 credential holders from around the world, from almost every industry imaginable: healthcare, telecom, finance, engineering, and construction around the world. And a survey done several years ago looked at those high-profile projects that were being conducted from around the world, and 80% of those projects are being led by a credentialed project manager. The PMI has a number of credentials, and the ones that we'll be, of course, focusing on are the PMP and CapM. It would be important to note that there are others as well. There is the Program Management Professional, Portfolio Management Professional, the Business Analysis, Scheduling Professional, Risk Management, and then finally, and the most recent credential is the Agile Certified Practitioner. If we look at the various domains with respect to the various credentials and their overlap, you'll see there's significant overlap between the types of effort and activities involved in the PMP, the Portfolio Manager, and the Program Manager. If we break down the number of active certification holders from around the world, again, the PMP makes up the largest of the credential holders. The second largest, of course, is the CapM, and a growing number under the Agile practitioners, as well as the Risk Management Professional. And if we look at the growth of the PMP certification during its inception in 1993 up to the current time, significant and exponential growth since the year 2000. I achieved my PMP in the year 2006. If we look at the value proposition of a formal project management methodology, these are the kinds of things that organizations tend to reap by way of benefits: better control of financial, physical, human resources. They tend to see an improved customer relationship, shorter development times, lower cost, higher quality, increased reliability of those products, higher profit margins, improved productivity, and better internal coordination, and higher worker morale. And I think evidence of that is if you've ever worked on a project where there was really no or a lack of a visible project management methodology, it leads to all kinds of chaos, and that chaos tends to contribute to poor worker morale. When we look at the toolkit that most professional project managers have, they tend to have a rounded educational background from virtually every area imaginable, but they also have what we call the project management knowledge areas, and there are 10 of them. There's an application area, and it tends to be surrounded by the industry in which that individual is involved in. They know the industry code, they know the competitors, they know the competitive situation, they know the regulations and standards that pertain to that type of industry. Project managers also have an understanding of the project environment, the need for a sponsor, the need for an organized approach, the need for project status meetings. They also have a general management flair for budgeting. They understand organizational theory. And then finally, human relations. They understand the process by which we network, how we secure resources, how we develop them, train these resources. Ethics, of course, plays a role in the course of projects, and you don't have to go very far to find circumstances in which ethics plays a role. And ethics can be defined, honestly, as those which guide our decision making around what is right and what is wrong. And project managers often face these ethical dilemmas, and this is particularly true when there are cross-cultural issues involved. Part of the certification process includes agreeing to the PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. And there will be questions on the PMI exam surrounding professional responsibility. So now let's look at the certification process, what's involved. Candidates have to have completed 35 contact hours. These contact hours are those courses in which you may have taken. Maybe you took a fundamentals project management course, MS project. Maybe you've taken some operations management courses. And it's best to consult PMI in determining whether or not the courses that you've taken would cover the PM course contact hours. Then you must enroll and submit the education, your project experience, and then sign off on the ethics agreement that you are going to abide by. And we'll take a deeper look into the project experience and what is involved with that. You can expect upwards of 5 days for your application to be reviewed. Randomly, your application could be subject to an audit, and you would have to complete the instructions, which typically involve sending your executive sponsors or those people who are attesting to your abilities and experience, send them a questionnaire which they must submit individually and independently of you to PMI. And then finally, you have to pay for the exam fees. And as of current, it's roughly $400 US for the PMP and $225 US for the CapM. And then once you've paid your fees, you're armed with your invite, you can then go enroll. And Prometric is a third-party testing center whose role is to set an environment to which the PMI exam and other professional exams are conducted in this secure environment. You will make your decision with respect to the location, what city you want, and these are offered in all major centers across Canada and the US. You select the date in which you want to write and the time of day. And I suggest that what you do is when you're in a position to make your decision, that you choose the time of day that works best for you in terms of when your energy level is at the highest. If you are a morning person or an afternoon person, you probably would want to choose to write your exam around that time. Let's now look at the timeline once again, just by way of the credential process. So you're going to enter your information on the PMI website, and you've got 90 days once you start to complete the application. And then once you submit it, you've got to expect at least 5 business days in which that application is reviewed. And if you are accepted, you'll be asked to make payment. And of course, you can't schedule their exam until you've made your payment and that you've received the invite. You can still be subject to the audit process, and you've got 90 days in which you can submit the audit materials, and they commit to roughly a 5 to 7 day turnaround in terms of reviewing the audited materials. When it comes to the exam, you've got 1 year from the date in which you are eligible to write, and you can write this exam up to 3 times during that first year. Once you have passed, there's a certification cycle. It begins the day you've passed the exam, and every 3 years there's a maintenance that's required to keep your credential current, and you have to have achieved in that 3-year period 60 professional development units, which can be obtained by coursework, volunteering, doing presentations, and much of that information will be sent to you with respect to what is considered eligible PDUs. And then once you've completed that 60 PDUs, then you can submit that and then pay the renewal fees. Just by way of the requirements for CapM and PMP, starting with the CapM, depending upon your educational background as to whether it's high school or global equivalent, you have to have achieved at least 1,500 hours of professional experience working actively in a project. Maybe you've led a series of projects. Maybe you have been a team lead. You've got 2 options under the CapM. In that case, you have the second option of simply obtaining 23 contact hours. Looking at the PMP requirements, you've got some choices depending upon whether or not you've achieved at least a high school diploma or have achieved a 4-year bachelor's degree. If you are applying under the first case, you have to have achieved 7,500 hours of project management experience, and this is to have been completed in the last 8 years. You also have to submit evidence of completing 35 contact hours of formal education, once again through a fundamentals course on project management, MS Project, some of the operations management courses offered in universities and colleges. The second option is if you have actually achieved a 4-year bachelor's degree, at which point you only have to have achieved 4,500 hours. Again, in both cases, 4,500 or 7,500 hours have to be involved in leading, directing project management tasks. In both cases, the 35 contact hours is required by way of formal education. The courses that I offer with respect to the exam prep, incidentally, qualify for the 35 contact hours. Now, turning back to the requirement to submit work experience, what you have to be able to do to support the 4,500 or 7,500 hours requirement is to submit your work experience. And to help you with that, you can secure this Excel worksheet. It's quite easy to use. And when you have downloaded it to your computer, for each of the projects that you're going to report on, you submit the project name, you submit the date in which the project started, the description of the project, and then you look at each of these scenarios that describe the various process groups or life cycle of a project, and you make an estimate of the number of hours that were completed in each of these scenarios. And as you do so, it's going to complete a summary, and that will give you some indication as to whether or not you're meeting the project management experience thresholds. You can, again, find this website at the smartpm.ca website. And if you look under the tab, How to Get Certified, you can download this spreadsheet, which has been already downloaded probably over 1,000 times and circulated around the world for those individuals who want to start a chronological history of their project management hours. This is also helpful to ascertain where you are today as to whether or not you're even eligible by way of the hours. And if you're not, use this spreadsheet to continue to accumulate the hours in your project management experience. And when you're ready, then you can complete the application process. Once you have completed each of the projects, there's a worksheet for each one. It automatically populates a worksheet summary. And on this summary, you'll see all of the projects, and you'll see the hours laid out in each of those process groups by way of a summary. Note that when you are entering in the project management hours, you do it on a summary basis, so for each project. You do not have to complete each of those scenarios. Let those scenarios guide and direct you in terms of where you could have secured some hours. This spreadsheet also does a number of audit checks with respect to the hours per month, just to make sure that they're somewhat reasonable. And there are some other built-in audit checks to make sure that your application makes sense from a time standpoint. I suggest to students that if you do not have the hours, do not make any overestimates, simply because if you get caught in the crosshairs of an audit and it's shown that you do not have those hours, that you've been untruthful, it will automatically dismiss you as an applicant. And there doesn't seem to be much of an appeal process. So I suggest that you at least begin to accumulate the hours, and then when you've reached those thresholds of 4,500 or 7,500 hours, then you continue on with the application process. When you're recording your experience on the application, you've got to make sure that you do not violate what's referred to as overlapping projects. And overlapping projects basically refer to you get two projects that might be going on simultaneously. Unfortunately, this is the way of life for most professional project managers. They're juggling a number of projects at the same time, and the PMI does not permit that. So we need to be concerned that you have not indicated overlapping projects. Just by way of an illustration, Project 1 and Project 2 on the left side panel shows an overlap between February and April. Project 1 began in January and ends in April. Project 2 begins in February and ends in June. So you'll have to make a choice of which of those two projects, certainly during the overlap, that you're going to report on. And you can use the hours that were not in the overlap situation, but those hours in the overlap situation are not permitted. The Project 3 shows no overlap. Once you've submitted your application, you're going to expect within 5 days, an email from PMI that describes that you are now permitted to make payment and book your exam. Just again, you can't schedule your exam until you've made payment. Again, $400 odd US versus the CapM of 225. You'll schedule your appointment by going to the Prometric website, and you'll be armed with an invite and an ID number. You'll submit that ID number to the website, and then you'll have access to the balance of the application process, which is scheduling your exam. You'll enter in that ID, and then you make a decision in terms of the city you want to write your exam, the date, and the time of day. And I suggest that you do this as early as possible so that you can secure the best opportunity for you to write your exam. And you want to make sure that you have secured the city you want, and the date and the time of day. And the earlier you do this, the better position you're going to be in terms of optimum flexibility. Once you have submitted that, you'll be given an exam confirmation, and this happens to be my confirmation received by Prometric, and I have to take this to the exam center along with government issued photo ID to prove that I am who I am and that I also have the confirmation. So now let's look at what exactly is involved in the PMP and CapM examination. Note that it's a multiple choice computer-based examination, 4 hours for the PMP. The CapM is 3 hours. The exam is marked psychometrically, which means that not every question bears the same marking. Therefore, you could have a more complicated question that might be given more of a weighting, an easier question, less of a weighting. When you receive your PMI exam scorecard, you'll see your results on the basis of various domains, and that domain would be measured by either proficient, moderately proficient, or below proficient. And it's quite possible that if you scored below proficient on one domain, as long as you've scored proficient on other domains, you'll still pass. 200 multiple choice questions for the PMP. For the CapM, it's 150. Again, 4 hours for the PMP, 3 hours for the CapM. That's roughly 1.2 minutes per question, 50 questions per hour. So when you are addressing this issue of writing your exam, you got to make sure that you are focusing on speed and efficiency and accuracy. Questions are randomly placed. There's no rhyme or reason or sequence. The exam is preceded by a tutorial, the purpose of which is to help you navigate through the various screens. And then at the end of the exam, there is a survey, and both of which are optional. This 15 minutes for both the navigation tutorial and survey is not included in the 4 hours and 3 hours respectively. You'll find that some of the questions on the exam are pre-tests, although you will not be able to recognize test questions from pre-test questions, the purpose of which are used for future exams to test the reliability, the reasonableness of these questions. Pre-test questions do not affect your score. Again, you do not know which ones they are. Your best response is to answer them with the same level of intensity. The PMP exam, again, we're mentioning a series of domains. There are 5 domains: initiating, planning, executing, monitor, control, and closing. And executing represents the highest proportion of questions, followed by planning and monitor and control. The CapM is measured on the basis of a series of chapters. And these chapters represented from the project management body of knowledge, currently the 6th edition. Each of these topics are measured, and they're relatively placed and evenly throughout the entire number of chapters. Here is the body of knowledge, referred to as the PMBOK. This is the 6th edition that came out in 2017. This is the current body of knowledge in which is used for testing purposes. When we look at the PMBOK, it's important to realize that there actually is structure to it, and this structure represented by, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see a series of knowledge areas. We describe these as areas in which considered to be areas of expertise that the project manager has. Across the top on the horizontal plane, you have a series of these domains or process groups: initiating, planning, executing, monitor, control, and closing. And within each of these knowledge areas and domains are a series of processes. There are currently 49 processes. These processes are activities in which the project management team is involved in with respect to ushering this project from beginning to the end of the project. These 49 processes include a series of inputs, a series of tools and techniques that are used in each of those processes, and a series of outputs. And these outputs invariably work themselves into inputs for other processes. It's important that students realize that you must know each of these 49 processes. You also must know the flow, the sequence, and my students are quite familiar by the time they're completed. Each of these 49 processes can describe their purpose and description and their inputs, their tools, and their techniques, as well as their outputs. There are a series of mathematical formulas that are going to be found on the exam. There are roughly 29 formulas. Formulas dealing with calculation of time and critical path. Also a series of financial, or what's referred to as cost or earned value formulas. And we typically suggest to students that they simply memorize these, but become familiar with their application and interpretation. And therefore, you want to get familiar with your calculator again. And I suggest in the process of preparing for your exam, you get used to using the onboard computer calculator. That's going to be the most likely the form of calculator that you'll be granted in the exam experience. Here's an example of a question dealing with critical path. So you'll be given a question, you'll be asked to read it carefully, and you have a series of choices. And with your mouse, you select which of those responses is the correct one. And I suppose what characterizes the PMI exams is that many of the questions you'll find, not only is there a correct answer, but there's also a number of good answers. And in order to be decisive on these questions, you got to choose the best answer. Another example using some graphics where you're going to be asked another question on critical path. You'll find questions that are rather lengthy with short answers, short question with long answers, and the variety of in between those two cases. Another example using information from the schedule knowledge management area. Questions involving what activity you're in, so going back and looking at that map of process groups and knowledge areas and those 49 processes, asking you to define where you are in that life cycle by way of identifying the name of the process. So some of the questions that I am often asked with respect to the application process: what supporting documentation do I send? Well, you don't send anything. What you do is you submit it and wait for, if in the unlikely chance you get audited. You don't send any documentation until that audit is required. And you'll be asked to provide the name and contact information for the executive sponsor, who will be asked to attest to the truthfulness of your spreadsheet. You want to make sure that you've complied in as much truth. You want to make sure that you are truthful in your application. Once you pass the exam, what's next? Well, as a credential holder, it takes a few weeks. You'll receive a package containing your certificate, but you can begin to use the PMP or CapM credential as soon as you've received notification that you've passed. You can start to accumulate these PDUs, or it's referred to as the Continuing Certification Requirements, or CCR. Again, it's 60 PDUs over a 3-year period, 20 PDUs per year. So what are the CCRs, these PDUs? Where do you get them? You have to accumulate 60 PDUs over that 3-year cycle. They can be accumulated through taking courses, through reading textbooks, through volunteer, a number of areas in which these PDUs can be acquired. Whereas the CapM, there's a requirement to re-exam after 5 years. In the case of where your eligibility expires, if you haven't written the exam, what do? Well, you've got 1 year from the time that you submit to have this ready to go. And if you allow that eligibility to lapse, you have to reapply once again. In the case if you were not successful in passing your exam, if you fail in your first attempt, you can retake it up to 2 more times, so 3 times in that 12-month period. Or, of course, you have to resubmit fees for each time you're submitting for exam. And there's other information on that re-examination process that you can find by downloading the handbook from the PMI website. If in the event you have to cancel your exam, what options do you have, depending upon what time period? If you have to reschedule your exam, as long as it's within 31 days of the exam, there's no fee. But as you get progressively closer to the date of the exam, you could be looking at full forfeiture. And finally, what does SmartPM offer by way of courses? We have the online tutorial, which is a online live instructor-based training. It's 8 weeks in duration for 18 units of lessons. It's run 4 times a year on Monday and Wednesday evenings from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. Secondly, we have the traditional classroom, consisting of a day of classroom where we review 4 of the 18 units, and then you have access to 14 units of video instruction of a self-paced nature. And this classroom is offered in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Kitchener. You may want to consult the website for the classroom nearest you. And then finally, the ever popular self-paced video series. This is for that person on the go that wants maximum flexibility. This is 18 units of video instruction, and whereas you set the pace, and I've had students complete the lesson material and write the exam within 7 weeks. So there are some options for you, and if you require more details, you can go to the website or you can email me. That's it for this PMI application process demystifying. Hope this has been helpful, and I hope that you'll contact me if you have any further questions, and you can do so by emailing me at sgharwood@tetanassociates.ca. Thanks for attending, and we'll talk soon.